Hey guys, so I have finally built my new NAS device and it has just about everything I could possibly want. An 8-core 16-thread processor, 128 gigabytes of ECC memory, 10 hot swap bays for 3.5-inch drives, 6 hot swap bays for 2.5-inch drives, 2 25 gigabit NICs, and an Nvidia RTX 3060 GPU for AI workloads, which we'll discuss later. We're going to talk about why I selected the hardware that I did, the case I selected, and the operating system. So I want to jump right into it, and the first thing we're going to discuss is the CPU. So I went with an older Ryzen 7 5700X, mainly because it has a 65 watt TDP, so it'll be very power efficient, and because it's more than powerful enough for exactly what I'm going to be doing. Now that processor is paired with an ASRock X570 Tai-Chi, which I've had for a while. I've had this combination for a while. I actually downgraded the processor, mainly for power efficiency purposes. I had a 5900X in this. We went down to a 5700X because it was on sale, and I'd rather the power efficiency. So because of that, I have 128 gigabytes of DDR4 ECC memory. So this combination does not support DDR5, but I am totally okay with that. This, again, is left over from an old hypervisor build that I had, but the ECC memory is recognized, and overall, because it was a NAS, I did want ECC memory, so I was happy that I could repurpose that. Next, we have to talk about the networking. So I went with 2 25 gigabit NICs. I am not going to be able to saturate those, most likely, unless I use all of the SSD bays, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I really wanted to set it up just so that I could get the maximum overall performance out of this NAS device. So I have 10 gigabit networking just about in all of my other devices, and it's set up with link aggregation. So realistically, I will not be able to get 25 gigabit speeds from any device on my network, but that was not important. I just wanted to make sure that everything that was connecting to the NAS would be able to operate at maximum speeds. So no, I probably won't be able to saturate even one 25 gigabit NIC, but if I ever get to a point hardware-wise where I have the hardware capable of that, it will be available, and I'll hopefully be able to saturate it at that point. Next, I have an HBA card. We don't really have to go over this. This is really just designed so that all of the hard drives and SSDs that are plugged into the device go into the HBA card, and it allows me to utilize all of those SATA devices that we just discussed and just use the HBA card rather than SATA ports. Now, the GPU. This is probably not the most common for a NAS build, but I had one main purpose that I wanted to do with this GPU, and it was for AI detection. So I run Blue Iris. I've been running it for a few years for my NVR. And there's a tool inside of Blue Iris that you can use called Code Project AI. And basically what it does is it just takes a still image and it runs it through a processor, an AI processor, and then it just sets specific values for its confidence level. So an example being, somebody walks by a camera that I have outside of my house. It takes a still image. It actually takes multiple still images, but it takes those images and it checks if it's a person. But at the same time, it's detecting other things. So it might detect that there's a bear, but the confidence level of that would be like a 5% rather than a 75% for a person. So I had this running as a virtual machine in Proxmox for the past probably year or two with PCI pass-through for this specific GPU. But when I built my new Proxmox servers, which I have a video for that I'll leave in the description if you're interested, those are 2U devices, so couldn't fit the GPU. So the main goal for this one GPU is just to run Blue Iris, but I want to see if I can also do Plex transcoding or Jellyfin transcoding with it as well. I actually passed through the GPU in testing, and it was easier to set up than I could have possibly imagined. In TrueNAS Scale, which we'll talk about in a minute, you can install the Nvidia drivers. It's just a checkbox. And I had this up and running in like 5 minutes. And that is a pretty big feat considering it took me a while to get this working in Proxmox. So overall, it's designed for that, but I'm going to see if I can run multiple Docker containers at the same time utilizing that GPU. Now, all of this had to go into a case, and I selected the Sliger CX4712. Now, for transparency purposes, they sent me the chassis, and I purchased a few additional add-ons. So I purchased some fans, I purchased the rack rails, the rack kit, stuff like that. So they paid for probably 60% of it, and I paid like 40% of it. I wanted this device for one main purpose. When I build PCs, like you can see behind me, I generally view the case as disposable with the PC. So when I say that, I mean that I build the PC, I upgrade the PC, it goes through its life cycle, but at the end of it, I never pull the components out of it and put new components in. That's just me, you might be different. But what I wanted to do with this NAS is I wanted to use a premium case because with rack mount devices, at least for me, I find that I will actually cycle out the internal hardware while keeping the case because it's just easier. So I wanted something that was premium, and this case is just about everything I could have possibly wanted. First, it's an absolute tank. This thing is an absolute beast. The build quality is crazy, and it's just premium in every single way. So that is awesome. Next, it has 10 hot swap bays. So I wanted to be able to hot swap hard drives and SSDs, which we'll talk about later, which wasn't even on my radar, but I saw a great video that we'll talk about in a second here. But I wanted to be able to hot swap the hard drives in case I run into any issues, and 10 bays for me is more than enough. And I can actually add technically 12 if you wanted to use the 5.25 inch bays, but 10 is going to be more than enough for me. And overall, so far, I've only added 4 drives into it for testing purposes. I've been extremely happy with the functionality. You can go in, you can lock the drive bays after you add and remove them. And overall, you just pop off the front panel, add in the hard drives, and it just works, and it works well. So when I was watching a video on this case, I came across a video by KTZ Systems, which I'll link below, that I recommend you check out. And he added a 5.2 inch expansion bay into his NAS device that had 6 hot swap SSD bays. And I saw it and I was like, this is genius, because it wasn't even on my radar, to be honest with you. So I was just going to mount the SSDs in there. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, that is an incredible idea. Not only is it an incredible idea, but the video is awesome. So again, I'll link that below. He goes through a full media server build. So if you're interested in seeing that, I watched the whole thing. I would suggest that you do too. But as soon as I saw that, I was like, I got to do that, because this is just going to make my life significantly easier. So what I plan on doing right now, there's 2 drives in there that are being used for the operating system for TrueNAS scale. But I want to try and test out shared storage with Proxmox. So I have high availability set up right now, but it's using VM replication. So I have a video for that. If you're interested in seeing that, I'll leave a pop-up for that now. But shared storage is technically a better solution. And what's even crazier is that if I really like this, I could add another one of these and get 6 more hot swap bays. Probably not going to do that, but if I wanted to, if I love shared storage, I could just add a bunch of them into that, set up a pool, and then just use that inside of Proxmox for my high availability. Props to him, great idea. And in my small amount of testing here, I love the way it works. So thank you to him. The final thing I should mention is the cable management. That is not really a sign of the case. That is a sign of me. I'm just notoriously terrible with cable management. I'm better with PCs than I am with rack mount servers, but I just kind of tuck the wires everywhere and it's a bit of a mess. So it doesn't look good. It functions fine, but I should highlight that if you do the cable management properly, unlike what I normally do, you can get it pretty good with this case. So at this point, I think it makes sense to switch over to the operating system. So I decided to use TrueNAS Scale, and it's the latest version, which is Electric Eel, which I think came out in October. So there's one main reason that I wanted to do this, and I still haven't fully figured out how I want to do it in terms of 1 RAID Z2 VDEV or 2 RAID Z1 VDEVs, but we'll get to that in a minute here. But ZFS expansion now works, and this is something that I think has been in development for a while, but in prior versions of TrueNAS, you were never able to just add in another drive and then expand the ZFS pool. So what you had to do is create 1 VDEV, and let's say it was 4 drives. If you wanted to add more storage, you'd have to create another VDEV of the same number of drives. So it would be 4 more drives. So when you wanted to expand your pool, you had to basically mirror exactly what you have here. Not mirror in the terms of what it actually is in ZFS, but mirror in the terms of if you had 4 drives, you had to add 4 more. That was never a realistic option for me, especially with my data. And quite honestly, I'm not sure if it's a realistic option right now for me either. But I have 4 6 terabyte drives in there right now, purely for testing purposes. I wanted to see if I could get the GPU working and everything like that. And we'll talk about what I'm going to do here in a second. But overall, everything worked well. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get all of my data off my 12 terabyte drives, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to add those into a ZFS pool. Right now it's going to be RAID Z1. And I'm going to get another 3.5-inch drive and I'm going to expand that pool. I just want to go through that process and see how that works. But I'm probably settling on 5 12 terabyte drives in a RAID Z1 VDEV, and I'll probably use a second, though I'm not totally set on that. So let's jump into this and I'll just show you everything that I have set up right now. Okay, so again, this is just set up as a sample setup. I'm probably going to reinstall TrueNAS Scale on this just to blank everything out and start from scratch. So what you'll see is I have my 128 gigabytes of ECC memory at this point. And why this is powerful is because ZFS utilizes RAM as cache. So generally, more is better. Fortunately, I was able to max that out, but I don't have any other cache drives inside of this device. I am going to try this out, see how it works, and if I find that I'm running into performance issues, then I can start looking into NVMe cache. But overall, I think the recommendation is run it with your memory. If you haven't maxed out your memory, max out your memory first, and then you can look into other options for caching. So this is just the dashboard here. Everything is pretty generic here. And the only thing I did is for testing purposes, I just came in with those 4 6 terabyte drives. I just created a RAID Z1 pool. Now, these are the things that I think any initial TrueNAS setup should have, and they're very generic. You've probably seen them in other places, but we're going to quickly run through that. And the first thing that you'll see is this scrub task. Now, this scrub task is created by default, which is great. And the way that this works, I think it's actually set up perfectly. So the schedule is that it runs every 7 days, but the threshold is 35 days. So the way that this works is, let's say it runs tomorrow. I think it's actually scheduled to run in a few days. So if it runs tomorrow, it will run, and then it'll check weekly to see if it has to run again. But it won't run again until the threshold, the total number of days have passed. So 35 days, that would be 5 weeks. So every 5 weeks, this process will run. You can modify this if you want by either lowering the threshold, increasing this to, let's say, monthly. Quite honestly, I wouldn't run it weekly. I'd probably run it monthly at a minimum, but the generic setup here is pretty good. I'm just going to leave it at this, quite honestly. I don't think it has to be changed. So that's something that everybody should run. But there are a few other things that you should do here. Now, snapshots. Snapshots freeze data at a point in time. And what I like about the way that TrueNAS handles it is if you come in here and you select add, you can select your pool and then you can exclude certain things. But what I like about this is that you're setting it up on the entire data set rather than setting it up individually. Now, you can monitor it and manage it individually if you want so that you could have different snapshot schedules. But the reason I like this is because generally, in a lot of other operating systems, what you'll do is when you create a new folder, snapshots won't automatically be set up on that folder. With this setup, they will be. Now, in terms of the schedule, you can run this as frequently or as infrequently as you want. Daily is generally fine. And then the snapshot retention schedule here, this is set to 2 weeks. I'm going to set this to 4 weeks, but you can again, modify this based on the data that you have on your NAS device. And overall, as long as you have snapshots configured, that's the bulk of it, but modify it based on what you want, and then you can go in and save it. Next will be S.M.A.R.T tests. So there are 2 types of S.M.A.R.T tests. They're short and long. I like to do all the disks just so that everything gets run. And then you can do a short test and you could do it on a schedule. Daily is too frequently. Weekly is probably what I'd recommend. And then you can save that and you can go in and do the same for a long test. But rather than doing it weekly, quite honestly, monthly might even be a little too long. You might want to do it quarterly. Quarterly is probably a better option. So I'm going to run this quarterly on the 1st of the month. Since the S.M.A.R.T test already runs on the 1st of the month, the short one, I have to use a different time. So this will run at 2 a.m. on the 20th of the month, and it runs every quarter. So in essence, what S.M.A.R.T tests will do is they just check your drives and see if there are any bad blocks. If there's any bad blocks, it'll report it to you. If you have any bad blocks, you know that the drive is in the process of dying, and while you might not have to replace it right this second, you probably should. Now that's a pretty generic setup. Obviously, you're going to want to go through and set up backups as well. But from a just generic TrueNAS scale setup, you set up your scrub task, you set up your snapshots, you set up your smart tasks, and then you can go in and create your data sets and do everything that you have to do, set up your users, your permissions, etc. Not sure how much interest there is in a video like that, but if there is, you can leave a comment down below and I'll create a video like that. So the only other thing I'll show you really quickly is how I have the GPU currently working with Docker. So I've been using Dockage, I think that's what it's called, Dockage, as my Docker manager. I switched over from Portainer. Portainer is still awesome, but I just wanted something a little more minimal, and I've been very happy with it. So all I did is come in here and I installed Dockage by searching for it and then installing it. And then the only other thing I did is in the configuration section here in settings, I selected install NVIDIA drivers. Now, again, I have an Nvidia RTX 3060 installed in this, and that checkbox installed all of the drivers. So if I come in here and run NVIDIA S.M.A.R.T, what you'll see is that it recognizes that GPU, the drivers are installed. Overall, extremely easy. I was really happy with how easy that was. But that's only half the process. So the first step is to install the GPU drivers, but the second step is to get it working with Docker. So I have this Docker Compose file that I have used since I configured this on Proxmox, and I just copied it into this and it worked. There was nothing more to check. So inside of here, I'm just passing in the NVIDIA GPU, and then inside of Code Project AI, it sees that GPU and it uses it. It was really as simple as that. Now, obviously, based on whatever Docker container you're using, the Docker Compose file will be slightly different, but that's all I had to do to pass in the GPU, and it has worked incredibly. As you can see, I'm getting detection speeds around 50 milliseconds, which I'm thrilled with. It's extremely fast, and it's been incredibly reliable over the past 2 years, but I've had this running for probably about a week now, and it's been incredibly reliable in TrueNAS scale as well. So I just wanted to test it out because this is a very important piece to my home lab. I wanted to test it out and make sure everything is working, and everything is working great. Now, there's obviously more inside of TrueNAS scale that I have to set up. And again, if you want to see a video like that, leave a comment below. But there's something that we have to discuss, and it comes around the reliability of this device. Now, this is a DIY NAS device with consumer grade hardware. So while I've kind of thought through everything in terms of what makes this a good NAS device for me, it doesn't mean that it's going to be a good NAS device for you. And quite honestly, I am a little concerned about the reliability. Now, I've been running servers with consumer grade hardware for years, and I can say that I haven't had many problems. I did have one problem, and it was with this device, and in specific, the CPU. So I had a 5900X. There was something wrong with it, probably, quite honestly, just a bad batch from COVID back when they were producing pretty questionable hardware at the time. But I did, in fact, have an issue with this specific device, though not this specific CPU. That's why I bought a different CPU. So with DIY hardware, when you buy an off-the-shelf NAS or you buy enterprise gear, which I don't have, there's some form of reliability. They've gone through stress tests and stuff like that. I don't expect any problems with this hardware, but it's not fair to you to say that this extremely overkill hardware for the majority of people will be on par with an off-the-shelf solution from a reliability perspective. I don't know. I hope it will be, but I can't guarantee that. So what that means is that my backup strategy is going to be very strong. I'm going to have basically a full backup on-site, and my goal is to have a full backup off-site as well. Now, that's just good data practice, but in this case, I find it to be very important just due to the nature of the device and the actual hardware that it's using. Next, this hardware is going to be overkill for the majority of people. You can run a NAS device. They have those integrated N100 motherboards that you buy. The motherboard, it's like a mini ITX motherboard. It has the processor integrated inside of it. Those are going to be great motherboards for a DIY NAS device. This is going to be overkill for the majority of people. The reason why I went with this hardware is because I just want to try to max out as much of this as I can from a performance perspective. And I also did want to potentially run a few of the containers like Code Project AI that I showed you, but possibly other containers as well. And I didn't want to be limited by the hardware. So while this is powerful hardware for me and potentially powerful hardware for you too, if you wanted to run something like this, I wouldn't say that it's necessary. You can look at other options. But what I do like about it is the flexibility that it offers. And quite honestly, outside of buying very expensive enterprise gear, I would not be able to get anything even close to this from a pre-built perspective. At least I don't think I could. But overall, I'll probably do a check-in in like 6 months or a year just to tell you how it's been running and be honest about it. Has it been good? Has it been bad? Have I run into any problems? Have there been any hardware problems? I just want to see how this works out. But overall, love everything about it up to this point. I'll leave a link in the description to the Sliger case that I'm using because I've been very, very happy with that. I'll leave a build guide in case you're interested in seeing that of just some of the hardware components that I selected. And overall, I know this was a lot. So if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments. But if you made it this far, thank you very much for watching. I will see you guys next time.